Talk about low-budget flights, no food or movies? I'm out of here. I like running better. Welcome back, YouTube viewers, to another video. Alright, so it's finally time to tackle the finale of my series and how I would fix the MCU. If you haven't seen the first two parts, I highly recommend you watch them before this, because this will have some new stuff, but also just kind of be a sort of ending for all the stuff I already set up before. So, what to expect from this? Well, I'm covering what I would tackle as Phase 3 of my version of the MCU. There's still a few things I kept from what we actually got, but especially as this series has gone along, I put in more of what I would have liked to see as opposed to fixed versions of what we actually got, but there is still some of that there. So, before we continue, I'd like to ask you all to check out my Letterboxd, link in the description. Maybe if you're interested in some of my other videos, you should check them out. So without further ado, let's do it to it and dive on in. Okay, so the first movie of my version of Phase 3 is Iron Man 3. Now, if you haven't seen the first two parts, you might be thinking, wait, didn't Iron Man 3 come out as the beginning of Phase 2? Well, in my strategy, I'm deciding if each character gets a trilogy, do one movie per one movie per phase, because one, it makes it so that each phase is more even with the amount of characters that get the spotlight, and I think it just manages to spread things out better. Because I said in my first part, and I guess second part as well, is that Iron Man 1 and 2 came out so close together, that's why 2 turned out the way it did. Was too rushed. So I feel like if you just wait a few years for each movie, it won't be as rushed. Anyway, so my version of Iron Man 3, much like the finished version, will include the Mandarin as a major part of the story, except it will be the actual Mandarin. Yeah, Iron Man 3 is pretty hated for many reasons. There are people who like it. I'm not one of those people. The biggest reason many people don't like it is because they completely ruin Iron Man's arch nemesis, the Mandarin. He was originally planned to be in the first Iron Man film, but they decided to cut him because he was such a big deal and this magical, mystical villain. They decided better to wait for a sequel before using him, and I think that was the right move. But the problem with the MCU's version of the Mandarin is that the trailers build him up as this big, epic villain who's going to be Iron Man's greatest challenge, like he should be. Also, they made him from the Middle East instead of from Asia, which I get why, because the original comics had Iron Man fight some guy had to get captured in the Vietnam War because it was the 60s. The movies had him get captured in Afghanistan because it was 2008. So I understand that part, but that's really more for the first movie because it doesn't really make sense for a guy from the Middle East to be called the Mandarin. And here he wouldn't be connected to the war in Afghanistan. He'd be just his own villain. So the problem with the movie version is that after the trailers build him up as this big epic threat, it turns out that the Mandarin isn't even a real character. The real villain just hired some random dude to make videos and threaten people about how he's the Mandarin and he's gonna destroy you or whatever. And is a complete joke of a character, and the villain we actually get is really lame, and he's just awful. And then the Mandarin does end up turning out to be real in the MCU, but he fights Shang-Chi, and it's only implied that he's the Mandarin, and he appears 2 years after Iron Man died. So they made the arch nemesis for a dead man. Truly brilliant writers. Anyway, so my version of Iron Man 3 so this one will be about how, okay, Tony Stark's already gone on 2 huge adventures by himself, 2 huge adventures with the Avengers. He's pretty much well established as this great superhero by this point. He's been through a lot by now, but because in my version, I'm not getting rid of Tony Stark has a heart condition, because I always thought that was a really interesting source of drama that the movies just dropped really quickly. So here it would be his heart is once again acting up, but it's really acting up. He really is close to dying. And thanks to some really bad luck, the Mandarin, this big new supervillain, has emerged. And he's going to prove himself by destroying Iron Man, who is considered by many to be the greatest superhero in the world or whatever. And a large part of Iron Man 3 is about how Tony Stark is separated from his suits, and he has to deal with fighting with whatever technology he can get his hands on, and he works together with some kid. And then at the end, he gets his Iron Man suits back. I think it's actually a fairly interesting idea, which I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but it ties way back to this story from the 60s where Tony, I don't remember how it ends, but point is Tony Stark has lost his armor and he has to fight this giant robot the Mandarin built that is basically invincible. So yeah, I think seeing Tony Stark have to face his greatest villain while also not really having access to his armor until the end, I think that would be really interesting because you get to see him get pushed to his breaking point, especially with his heart condition and everything. And at the end, when he finally does defeat the Mandarin, it would feel really satisfying because you got to see him go through so much trial and tribulation to get to this point. And maybe we could still have the ending where he unleashes a bunch of Iron Man suits that just fly around by themselves, and you could have him fight the Mandarin's robot army or something. Have one of your typical MCU gray CGI green screen final battles, except that would be in the background. The main plot, the main final battle would still be Iron Man in his suit fighting the Mandarin and all his magical powers. And I think that would make for a really cool finale. Because the real final battle isn't some massive, giant, a battle of armies. The real final battle is just two guys duking it out with their fists and flying around or something. And I think that would be really cool. And we're not going to try to, unlike the actual version, we're not going to, this movie wouldn't be obsessed with being subversive or whatever. We could have gotten, this could have been a really good movie. And I myself, I said this before, I may not be a professional writer or anything, but I still think I have some interesting ideas. Okay, Captain America 3. So, you might be wondering, wait, what about Civil War? I'm just ditching Civil War because part of my problem with it is that even though it's one of the better MCU movies, it feels more like an Avengers movie where Captain America just so happens to have more screen time than the other members. It doesn't really feel like it's a Captain America movie because they have to shove in Iron Man, Black Widow, and Hawkeye, and Falcon, and introduce Spider-Man and Black Panther, and there's Ant-Man. It's just way too much stuff for one movie, I think. So the plot, I established in my last video that in my version of Captain America 2, the Red Skull would reveal himself to have been alive for all these years and plotting his revenge or whatever. So my version of Captain America 3 would basically just be all of that coming to fruition. So the Red Skull would, I don't know, try to take, maybe he would have been defeated at the end of the last movie, but in this one, he will escape from prison and unleash the Sleepers. If you don't know what the Sleepers are, they weren't one episode of Earth's Mightiest Heroes, but also it's this really old comic story where Captain America finds out that years ago the Red Skull told him, even if I die, the Sleepers shall awake and destroy you or whatever, which was this giant robot thing that was made of 3 pieces that would combine together to form one giant robot that would basically act as his tool of vengeance even after he's gone. I wish I showed a picture of it here. So that's what it would be about. Captain America has to stop the Sleeper from being formed together and catch the Red Skull who has escaped from prison. And the final battle will be him having to have one last showdown with the Red Skull. Much like how my version of Iron Man 3 is about Tony Stark facing his biggest challenges. Even without his armor, he's still able to win the day. Of course, till he gets his armor back at the end, but whatever. And Captain America 3 would be about Captain America finally defeats his oldest and greatest enemy once and for all. Because here the Red Skull would actually die. Right? Because the end of the first Avenger, the movie we actually got, and my version of the first Captain America movie, the Red Skull just disappears in the cosmic cube teleportation, which everyone thought was going to be used to set up for his return in the sequels, but it was another 7 years before he showed up, and he just had basically a glorified cameo in Infinity War, which was really lame. So yeah, I don't really have a ton of details for this one. I just spitballing some ideas here. Alright, Spider-Man Homecoming. So I'm still going to keep the title because I'm really not sure what I'd call this. And so this movie will still be about Peter Parker in high school fighting against the Vulture. Oh, and Liz Allen, who he goes out with, turns out she's the daughter of the Vulture. I like that. The classical Peter Parker's first girlfriend. That whole thing that ends up not working out. The key difference between this version and the finished version, though, is that Iron Man doesn't have a role in this. Everyone agrees, and for good reason. The MCU tied Iron Man to Spider-Man way too heavily. Spider-Man should be allowed to exist on his own. I don't like the idea of his suit being given to him by someone else and having tech built into it. It's just Peter Parker built this cool costume by himself. So this movie would be pretty simple. Okay, Peter Parker's in high school. He's dealing with all that stuff, but he's also dealing with the fact that he's Spider-Man now. And in this version, their Uncle Ben will have existed. He will have died. This might be mentioned a couple times. We just don't see it, because we don't need to see the origin for the millionth time. Aunt May would actually be old because how come she just gets progressively younger in each version of the movies? In the Raimi movies, she's this old woman with white hair like she's supposed to be. In the Andrew Garfield movies, she looks like she's in her late 50s or early 50s. But then in the MCU, she looks like she's in her late 30s or something, or early 40s, but just is not right. Everyone prefers the whole idea of Peter Parker has to deal with his old aunt who gets sick all the time, and he has to deal with that because that's good drama. Also, Aunt May would hate Spider-Man like she did in the comics and some of the adaptations. So yeah, that's part of it. So yeah, Peter Parker would be dealing with being Spider-Man. He has been Spider-Man, let's say, for about a year now, maybe a couple months, but he still hasn't dealt with anything huge before, mostly just common crooks, thugs, that sort of thing. Like, he's seen the Avengers on TV or something, so he's seen supervillains, but he's never had to deal with one until now, and that is the Vulture. So, the Vulture's motivations here can still be the same, which is that he and his company were cleaning up the New York City and all the alien tech in it after the first Avengers movie. But then Tony Stark's company came in and decided to do it themselves, and he got super mad at Tony Stark, and that's why the Vulture became a supervillain. Also, here his costume would be more comic accurate. Like, if you want to give him a helmet or something, I guess it's not a huge deal. I mean, it would make sense, but I don't know. I prefer the idea. I just like his classic comic costume where he looks more like a bird. I mean, he's called the Vulture. The MCU costume is just a bit too dark colored and doesn't, and it's green with wings, but it still doesn't really look that similar to what the Vulture is supposed to look like. I like the idea of him having the Shocker as a goon, except he wouldn't have the Shocker die and then get replaced with a second Shocker, and he would actually have a costume. Why did they not give him a costume? I just always found that to be really lame. So yeah, Peter Parker has to deal with his high school life, his sick aunt, and then also has to deal with the fact that he's going to fight his first supervillain. This might sound a bit derivative, but I think there's enough that was done in the version of Homecoming we actually got that I could carry over here. Like, maybe you could have a part where they go on a field trip to Washington, D.C., and Spider-Man climbs at the Washington Monument, and we find out he's afraid of heights. I don't know, I think that's kind of a fun idea. Because what if it's that, when he's Spider-Man, he only swings around buildings that are lower to the ground, but the Vulture figures, well, I can fly. If I just fly to higher places or something, Spider-Man won't get me. I don't know, I think that's a cool idea. Also, I will say about Homecoming, even though I'm not the biggest fan of the final film, is that the Vulture was actually portrayed as a big villain who was threatening, which is something I appreciate, because that's how he is in the comics, but I can imagine most writers, especially ones from the MCU in its later years, would probably treat the Vulture as a joke villain, even though he's not supposed to be. This was Spider-Man's second supervillain, right after the Chameleon, so I don't know, I'm just glad he was treated as a big deal. So yeah, Spider-Man fights the Shocker as a side villain. At the end, he fights the Vulture as a main villain. And he also has to he's starting to go out with Liz Allen, but then he finds out, oh, her father is a guy who wants to kill me as Spider-Man. I guess we're going to have to break up. I don't know, I think that'd be fun. Also, Aunt May wouldn't find out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man at the end. I thought that was really stupid. Next, we're having the finale of Thor movies, so Thor Ragnarok. Except aside from the title, this isn't really going to have much to do with the actual Thor Ragnarok because, oh boy, is that movie rough. It's been said by everyone nowadays that Thor Ragnarok is basically just they tried to make a Guardians of the Galaxy movie with Thor and they shoved in a bunch of really weird humor and it didn't work. Also, the Hulk would not be in this movie because I want to focus on Thor specifically. I want this to be a satisfying ending to his story before Endgame, which we'll get to later. So, at the end of the actual version of Thor the Dark World, which I kept in my version, Loki faked his death as a hero, helping Thor. But it turns out he was still alive because, he faked his death, and he's taken Odin's place as King of Asgard. Maybe he's locked Odin up somewhere. Earth's Mightiest Heroes did a great arc of Loki taking over Asgard that was really, really good. Maybe you can pull some stuff from that, but it's still mostly the original. So, much like Thor has dealt with, okay, he's saved the world with the Avengers twice. Much like Iron Man, yeah, he's done that, and he's had 2 of his own solo movies already. He's been through a lot. But is but since he spent so much time on Earth, he decides, maybe I should actually return to Asgard. And then he returns to Asgard, and he finds out that Odin has been usurped by Loki. And Loki's ruling Asgard with an iron fist, and he wants to finally kill Thor so that no one can ever oppose him. And I said the Enchantress and the Executioner could be included in the last Thor movie. Have them here. Maybe they work as Loki's enforcers or something. But eventually they see that this guy will probably kill us at some point because he's gone so mad with power. Because I think the idea of Loki having some kind of madness arc is cool. Maybe it's as he finds how to use more and more of his powers now that he's king of Asgard. It's going to his head. Maybe that he finds out that maybe he tries to kill Thor in the beginning but fails and starts to drive him crazy, thinking, how could I still not get him? I need a win. And the Enchantress and the Executioner think, oh yeah, we probably shouldn't work for this guy anymore because he's gone completely insane. And they have to team up with Thor, and they have to fight Loki. Maybe they recruit Jane Foster to help out, because I guess I could keep this in my version of Thor, the Dark World, which was also in the actual version, is that since Jane is Thor's girlfriend, she ends up getting involved in Asgardian, like she comes to Asgard, learns about Asgardian culture. Maybe we could have her brought along here and on the journey, and the Enchantress and Executioner would hate this because she's just some dumb Earthling or whatever. But Thor's thinking, I don't care. He's in love with her, and they need all the help they can get. And I guess she wouldn't be that effective, honestly, because I mean, what? She's a paramedic. She's not a superhero. But I don't know. You could at least include her in some way because she's an important character to Thor. You could have some epic battle at the end, whereas Loki has gone so mad with power. He's going to cause Ragnarok, which is the title of the film. The storyline of Ragnarok is about how this fire demon called Surtur, who is in the actual movie, is unleashed and is going to destroy the world. So maybe throughout the movie we get these subtle teases of Surtur, and how at the end Loki accidentally releases him. And though Thor is able to finally defeat Loki once and for all, he doesn't kill him, but then Surtur does, and then they have to deal with him for the big third act. How would he be defeated? I don't know. Oh, I don't like the idea of Asgard just being destroyed because I think that's stupid. Maybe it would end with, after the day is finally done, not only is saved, not only is Asgard completely in ruins, Thor rescues Odin and restores him on the throne, but he says, son, after going through all the adventures you've gone through, I think sooner rather than later I'm going to make you king of Asgard. And Thor doesn't want to be king of Asgard, but he accepts that, yeah, I'm going to have to do this eventually. I think that would make for a much better movie. Don't throw Thor into some weird sci-fi movie with the Hulk and dumb jokes and aliens or whatever. Make it some epic fantasy movie with giant monsters and all that stuff. Okay, what's next? Ant-Man. I don't have a ton of ideas for this one. I just figured that, much like how I included Doctor Strange in my last video, I think it's good to just get a couple solo films that don't really impact the story in a huge way, just like my version of Spider-Man Homecoming. Because we may have big franchise movies, Iron Man 3, Captain America 3, Thor Ragnarok. It's also fun to just get solo movies about random superheroes that fill out the world more. So, I'm not really sure how I'd approach Ant-Man's story here, because on the one hand, I might want to use the original Ant-Man, Hank Pym, and include the Wasp as his sidekick. But I also don't hate the MCU decided to go with the Scott Lang Ant-Man and make Hank Pym an old man who mentors him, but I think using Hank Pym instead might be better because it's a little less confusing. I don't know. And we can just throw the Wasp in there. Have it be kind of like Earth's Mightiest Heroes, where Hank Pym becomes Ant-Man, and yeah, he is a superhero. In this version, he wouldn't quite be a pacifist, but he still wouldn't be super interested in fighting supervillains. He'd be more wrapped up in his scientific research, while the Wasp wants to be a superhero and beat up bad guys, and the conflict between the two main characters is throughout that. One wants to just be a scientist, and the other one wants to be a superhero. Who would the villain be? I'm gonna say MODOK. I'm not entirely sure how that worked, but MODOK was in Ant-Man 3 in real life, and they completely destroyed his character, but also, MODOK is tied to AIM. AIM was never actually in the MCU for some reason. They were set up in Iron Man 3, but they just never went anywhere. If you've seen Earth's Mightiest Heroes, read some comics, or I guess they're also in Avengers Assemble, I think. I think they were also in that Avengers video game from a few years ago. You've seen AIM. They all look kind of like beekeepers, but they're basically this army of super geniuses who want to build crazy weapons to conquer the world. And they built MODOK to be their leader, essentially. So Ant-Man and the Wasp would have to fight MODOK and AIM. Why? I don't know. Maybe they want to steal Ant-Man's shrinking technology or something. I think that can make for a cool story. Maybe you could have a scene where Ant-Man has to do stealth and shrinks down and invades their base or something. I think that'd be cool. So this wouldn't be some huge, big movie. I mean, it'd still be a Marvel movie, so it'd still be a big deal, but it wouldn't be this next level experience for the ages. No. Something, a smaller type of blockbuster. Something more akin to, let's say, Sonic movies. I don't know. Okay, next we're given Black Panther his own solo film. Now, to be quite honest, I hate the Black Panther movie, the first one. I'm not a huge fan of Black Panther as a solo character. I like him as a supporting character, but not as a solo one. And I found his solo movie to be unbelievably boring. It was long and dry, I didn't care about the characters, and I thought the villain was just awful. How people say his motives were completely justified is beyond me. But I think a better version of Black Panther would be tackle his origin story from Earth's Mightiest Heroes, which I think it's kind of from the comics, which is that. So T'Challa is Black Panther, but his father was T'Chaka. He was the leader of Wakanda, and everyone loved him. But then one day, this is more so his comics origin, this guy named Claw, who is in the MCU, and was actually played pretty well, shows up, wants to steal the vibranium, and kills T'Chaka. So T'Challa becomes Black Panther and hopes to avenge his father. And so he'd have to fight against Claw. And much like the comics and many of the cartoons, Claw would get turned into a giant monster made of sound, like this image here. It's a weird concept, but it is cool. I mean, in the movies, Claw is played by Andy Serkis, who I would actually keep. He played Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, which I think actually is pretty fitting casting, because Claw isn't supposed to be this mastermind villain. He's just a pathetic, slimy jerk who also happens to get incredible powers. I like the idea of that kind of villain. The villain isn't going to be some mastermind guy like the Mandarin or the Red Skull. He's just some slimeball who gets superpowers. So yeah, much like Ant-Man and Spider-Man Homecoming, not a huge deal for a movie, just something fun that can that still has some that can still genuinely be good that also just fills out the world more. So before I get into my version of Avengers Endgame, I'm going to talk about my team roster for the Masters of Evil. So I said I think in both my previous videos that instead of building to Thanos for the finale, I want to build to the Masters of Evil. The Masters of Evil are basically an evil Avengers team. And I think that would be really cool to see in the movie. So I'm going to go over my picks for the roster. So I'd say that Zemo should kind of be like an evil Nick Fury, where he's slowly, and we can get some post-credit scenes or something like that throughout the MCU, where he's slowly gathering supervillains to form his own team to defeat the Avengers. So he would be Captain America's enemy. Whiplash, who's the guy in the gray armor on the top, who was in Iron Man 2, I'd keep him actually to stay alive in this version. So he'd get to be Iron Man's villain, because I feel like it wouldn't be a good idea to keep Mandarin around for the Masters of Evil, because he's too big a deal to be thrown into some supervillain team where he's not the main focus. That's why the Green Goblin doesn't work as part of the Sinister Six, because the Green Goblin has to be his own character. It wouldn't really make sense for him to be taking orders from someone. The Enchantress, and I guess you could throw in the Executioner as well, would serve as Thor's enemy. Because even though she worked together with Thor in my version of Thor Ragnarok, she's still a villain. She was a founding member of the Masters of Evil in the comics. The Abomination is on the bottom right. He's one of the few villains in the MCU, the real version of it, who never dies, but he just gets a bunch of cameos, never really does anything. I said in what I would like to see for an Incredible Hulk sequel in the last video, you could maybe kill him off, but I'm thinking, maybe you can keep him alive, because the Hulk needs someone to fight in this team, so... And I wouldn't, much like with why I wouldn't keep around the Mandarin, it wouldn't really make sense for the leader to be part of a supervillain team, because he's the leader. He always has to be on top. Then finally there's Taskmaster, the guy in the white hood. You might be wondering, who is this guy? I don't think you mentioned him before. I briefly mentioned him in the first part where I'd say that we should have had an Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. movie where it was about Nick Fury, Hawkeye, and Black Widow. Maybe you could have this guy be the villain, because Taskmaster was the villain of the actual Black Widow movie. Although he had basically nothing to do with his comic counterpart, and I'm pretty sure they made him a girl for some reason. So, Taskmaster's character is that he can copy the fighting styles of anyone he fights. And so I think the idea of a super spy and a master marksman's arch enemy being a guy who can copy the fighting styles of anyone who's really good at hand-to-hand combat and carries around sometimes a bow and arrow and a shield, I think that'd be pretty fitting. I don't know about you, so that would be the final Avengers team. Throughout all my movies, I wouldn't change the team roster, because I want the team roster to stay consistent so that viewers could actually get invested in this specific team. So that'd be Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, the Hulk, Hawkeye, Black Widow. Now for my version of Avengers Endgame, the big ending, the finale. So, my version of Avengers Endgame would not be about time travel, and it wouldn't include Thanos, or it wouldn't have cameos from 1,000 different Marvel characters, because even though this is supposed to be the big finale of this version of Marvel, although I might do a part 4 of this series, I don't know, I still would want this to primarily be about the Avengers that we've already followed. There's not really a need for Spider-Man or Doctor Strange to be in this movie, because what would they contribute? What reason do they have to be fighting Zemo and Whiplash? So my version of this would be as follows. After all these movies, Zemo has finally assembled his supervillain team, the Masters of Evil, and they're ready to fight the Avengers, except due to all the drama the Avengers have been facing throughout the previous films, the team is kind of split up. After Thor Ragnarok, well, Thor hasn't become King of Asgard just yet. He's in training, so he's kind of hanging around Asgard. He's not really protecting Earth. Captain America is maybe helping S.H.I.E.L.D. rebuild after the Red Skull attacked them in previous movies. I guess so would Hawkeye and Black Widow. Iron Man would he'd still be Iron Man. He was focused mostly on being Tony Stark, trying to finally fix his heart once and for all. His company, because Tony Stark is supposed to be the owner of a huge company. He'd think he'd want to get on that. Bruce Banner is still dealing with the duality of being the Hulk. Even though the world has calmed down on him after he saved people so many times, there are still people who view him as a monster, so Bruce Banner is mostly just keeping to himself. So this would give the Masters of Evil the perfect chance to strike at the Avengers one by one now that they're all split up. And what would the plot be? Like, what would it be focused on? Because it can't just be as simple as the good guys fight the bad guys. I do think an idea of each character is split up. Maybe the movie is split into different subplots. Kind of like the comedy It's Mad World, or you ever seen the movie American Graffiti by George Lucas? The movie is made up of various different subplots of different characters on their own story, and at the end they all collide for one big climax. That's what would happen. After the Avengers all get beaten up real bad by their respective villains, they're able to communicate with each other and come together to have one big epic battle. Would it be in New York City? Would it be in space or something, or in Asgard? We've already had New York City get attacked before, but let's do that, because at least it would make for some interesting scenery. And yeah, this would be a more interesting final battle than a ton of superheroes at night against fight a gray army of sludge on a green screen. Well, I'm sure New York City set would still be somewhat green screened here. I'd still ideally have a lot of practical sets. And since it would there wouldn't be a million characters here. It'd be easier to tell what the action is. And so, yeah, the Avengers finally beat the Masters of Evil. They finally kill their respective villains. Maybe they wouldn't have Captain America like stab Zemo with his shield or something. I don't think Captain America would do that, although he might. I don't know. Maybe some of them would be caught in some big explosion. You know how in the actual version of Iron Man 2, Whiplash tries to blow Iron Man up, and then he ends up dying, even though he knows he's going to go along with it. Why don't we bring that in here? He tries to he's saying to Iron Man, well, this self-destruct may kill me, but it's also going to kill you, and I'll finally have my revenge. And then he ends up getting blown up in the process, and Iron Man gets out. We'll do for the Abomination. Maybe he's finally cured of his gamma power, so he's just a regular human now who gets sent to prison forever. He can't harm anyone ever again. Maybe the Taskmaster just gets killed, because I don't know what else to do with him. Who are the other villains? Let's see. We've done Zemo, Abomination, Taskmaster. Who were the other villains? Sorry, guys, I'm kind of forgetting. Whiplash. Okay, so all we left is Be the Enchantress and the Executioner. What would happen to them? I'm not really sure if I would kill them off, because if I ever do make a part 4 and want to do another Thor movie, because we did actually get another Thor movie after Endgame in real life, I might want to keep them around, but I feel like by this point they would have served their purpose. They were there for the Thor sequels, they were here for Endgame. I don't know what else I'd do with them. Maybe you could have them just willingly give up or just exile themselves. So in case I do want to bring them back for another video, they wouldn't have to bring them back from the dead or something. But for all intents and purposes, their story is done. So the Avengers will come to the conclusion that, wow, they've been on 3 major adventures together. They saved the world from Loki. They saved the world from Ultron. And they saved the world and themselves from their ultimate enemies. And none of them would die. Because I really hate it that the MCU killed off Iron Man and basically killed off Captain America as well. And got rid of a bunch of the other characters because these characters are the face of Marvel. You can't replace them because that's just who the characters are supposed to be. No one wants to see someone else as Captain America because Steve Rogers is Captain America. After all, they recently reported that the MCU is going to go through a soft reboot in a few years where, yes, we will still have Tom Holland as Spider-Man, our current version of the Fantastic Four, but we'll get all new versions of Iron Man and Captain America because these characters need to stay. Does that mean I want to continue this series and give them more solo films? Maybe, but I'm not entirely sure. If I do make a part 4, they probably wouldn't get new solo films, they just wouldn't be dead. So, they'd still be around helping people. So, how would the character arcs for each Avenger conclude? Let's start with Captain America. He would think, wow, I defeated all my old enemies from my past. I found a place in the modern world as a superhero. I'll maybe never fully regain what I lost, but that's okay because I have something now. And you know what? For his movies, we could even throw in Sharon Carter, who was in the MCU but eventually gets abandoned. Her character from the comics is that she was somewhat related to Cap's old girlfriend from the 40s. And since in the MCU he never really knew that girl, because, he got frozen in ice, he get to marry this girl instead and still be a superhero. So there wouldn't be a complete betrayal of his arc where he just decides to travel back in time and there's all this time travel nonsense that doesn't make any sense, and we're ditching that. So Captain America's character arc ends with him saying, I'm a superhero, I found a place in the present day, I'll never regain what I've lost, but that's okay. Iron Man would be, the MCU had him get married to Pepper, let's have him get married to Pepper. It's the same deal. I may, never be the same because I'm still going to spend the rest of my life as a superhero, but since there are other superheroes out there, because Spider-Man's a thing now, Doctor Strange, Black Panther, he can not necessarily take a break, but he can spend more time being Tony Stark with his wife and running his company than just spending every single day of his life flying around in an Iron Man armor, but he still would be Iron Man. We're not going to have him retire. Thor, he would say, the Earth is safe, it has plenty of heroes to protect it, I'm finally going to go to Asgard and accept my place as their king. Hawkeye and Black Widow would just stay working for S.H.I.E.L.D. or something. Bruce Banner and the Hulk, what would happen with him? He would deal with the fact that there are always going to be people who hate me. I'm always going to be called a monster by at least one person. But as long as I do the right thing, that's ultimately what matters. I remember that scene from Earth's Mightiest Heroes where Captain America says, "In my day, there was a name for people like you. Hero. I've been watching you, Hulk. No matter how afraid people are of you, no matter how much you're hounded, you always do the right thing." I think that's the perfect direction for Hulk's character. So yeah, I enjoyed making this video series, and honestly, this is probably my favorite of the three. Because for here, in this video, I gotta bring to an end everything I had set up before, as well as throw in some new ideas. I'd like you all to comment down below what you thought of this, because I had a lot of fun putting this together. Now, will I make a part 4? Probably, because I still do want to focus on the Fantastic Four. I want to focus on the X-Men. I want to give Doctor Strange and Spider-Man some more solo films. But if I do those videos, will I set up a massive next level threat? Honestly, I don't think so, because this was the Avengers team roster I've settled with for these movies. And once they've beaten all their big bad villains, we've seen the Avengers. We don't need a new Avengers team. We already have the Avengers. We don't need Captain America get replaced with a guy who was never going to be Captain America. We can just say, okay, Steve Rogers is still a superhero, but his story that is worth seeing is over. It's kind of like how, at the end of Kung Fu Panda 3, if you've seen that movie, Po doesn't stop being the Dragon Warrior. Kung Fu Panda 4. But he's had his biggest adventure yet. Even though he's not retired or whatever, what more do we need to see? Because his story has ended. Maybe his story hasn't completely ended permanently, but the most meaningful parts, all the development that you'd really want to see, that's over. So we'll just get some more smaller movies. They might be disconnected, but that's okay. We'll get to see the Fantastic Four fight Doctor Doom and the Mole Man and maybe the Mad Thinker or something. We'll get to see Spider-Man go to Europe and fight Mysterio. We're going to see Doctor Strange travel to the Dark Dimension and fight Dormammu. Whatever. The more that I talk about it, I do want to make a part 4. So I will make a part 4. When? I don't know. But if you follow this channel, be on the lookout for that. That's all for now. And remember to stay way past cool.